Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another episode of the Prophetico and the Bands of Time. Matthew, do I have you in the saddle?
You most certainly do, Bry. And we certainly have literally a super wave of information coming your way tonight. But I'm going to predicate it with this. I'm not going to share everything that's here in this chapter, but covering the chapter that, alphanumerically speaking, exemplifies the Tribulation Trigger is detrimental to what is to come in preparation for the bride, making sure that she knows exactly what's going on. This is an inhibitor of fear. Once you know what is to come, there's quite simply no reason for you to even be concerned. Even though there's much hype about the end times. But ladies and gentlemen, I'm not going to share everything. Some of the things that I know about this chapter, I shared with Brian before the program, is not going to be displayed publicly because we have to remember that a lot of you are prepared to hear all the information. Most of you are not. So we have a whole lot of information to share nonetheless. But like I said, it is going to be inhibited a little bit because there really is a whole lot of information here. And when we're talking about the Tribulation Trigger, most people don't even know what we're talking about. They have no idea what is to come. Because the academic theological community was, of course, overthrown by God haters in the 70s. So since that time, it's just gotten worse and worse and worse. They literally build their end time eschatology off of fantasies. Literally. But what is to come is detrimentally important to the bride, that she be able to make her garments ready. So we're going to talk about this tonight, exactly what is to come. The events detailed here, alphanumerically speaking, you should know all these integers off the top of your head. You have the first integer, of course, of 2,300 days, given by Daniel. The next one, of course, is 1,290 days. He ends it there. Now, he goes on to add 45 days and say 1335. He, however, never mentions the one integer that the book of Revelation gives you, because Gabriel's not concerned with that. He is only concerned with the heavenlies being put back in their place. So the events after that, that's why that temporal quanta of time, God marvelously calls three different things. He calls it 1,260 days. He calls it 42 months. He calls it times time and a half time. But take note, that is the reason why Gabriel never addresses those events after Revelation chapter 14, because Gabriel's not concerned with that. The only thing that Gabriel has to say is that he's happy that heaven has been put back in order, and the rest is up to God. And of course, in the book of Revelation, you hear the angel cry out, "Woe, woe to you, earth, because the dragon has come down to you." So for those events, Gabriel's really not concerned with. That's why he does what he does. So these integers should be first and foremost in your mind. The 2,300, 1,290, 1335, 1,260. They should literally be rolling off your tongue whenever somebody talks about days or lengths of time in the Bible. That should be the first thing that comes to your mind concerning the end days. So with that in mind, Brian, I sent you a document that was long in the tooth. And like I said, I don't want you to share everything that I shared with you, but Give me your thoughts on just the amount of alphanumerical equations in this one chapter. I mean, ladies and gentlemen, statistically speaking, this is absolutely phenomenally impossible. Um, and if you don't know that, alphanumerically speaking, all of these integers being crammed together in one chapter, you just don't realize it's absolutely breathtaking. God doesn't ever do this with a single chapter. What he does here is off the charts. So, Bry, what's your thoughts on all of these alphanumerical equations being in this singular chapter? And pepper your comments a little bit with why this chapter is so popular. You know, you have the, of course, you have the parabolic prophecy impregnated into this chapter. Of course, the mighty parable that we have there of prophecy. On top of that, everybody loves that there's 70 in it, but not really. There's really 72. So this chapter is famous, and we've talked about this chapter many times, but now that I sent you that document, ladies and gentlemen, Brian realizes what I was thinking the whole time. So what's your thoughts on it, Brian? And you looking at all of those integers, all of those equations winding up in this one chapter that many times. What's your general thoughts on the situation?
Judges 9 has always been a chapter that is amplified. I mean, you would have a standard common conversation with somebody and, just bring this up. Well, who was the first king over Israel? Everybody's going to tell you Saul. Technically speaking, it's a little different here with Abimelech because he set himself up as a king. And a whole lot of things transpired to get there in the meantime and in its finality. Matthew brought up, we have an entire slew of variables within numerical systems that we should automatically recognize. I've noticed myself, I've seen it time and time and time again, and there's no problem with this. Before I state this, don't get me wrong, but I know there's a lot of people that are trying to understand this timeline. And I've even been sent a couple of emails. We'll take a look at this, take a look at this. I really applaud them for trying. That's an awesome thing. This is a confusing topic until you start sitting down and thinking about the numbers logically. Now, as Matthew already knows, we've spoken about this. I don't know if we actually have done this on our videos. I just worked on something earlier in the week, which I'm entitling the Menoscale. Okay, there's a lot more going on in the prophecy of Daniel's 70 weeks than most people realize. Because it says some very strange things there in Daniel 9. It doesn't say 70 in weeks, it says 70 and 70. And then it turns around and repeats itself again. And as Matthew brought up, and I think it's kind of crucial to point this out because my wife picked it up right away after I sat here looking at it. And I asked her, I said, "Hun, there's 470s in here." And she goes, "Yeah, 280. And I said, "Yeah, a birth cycle." So what we're in the beginning process here of is getting everybody to understand how it is that this entirety of these timelines work, how these prophetic texts and their implications work. And this is going to lead to something even more so in the future because a lot of the work I've personally been doing has everything to do with correcting the timeline. The chronology as we have it right now is an absolute nightmare. One of my big issues has been, well, you slam headlong into the Persian Empire. Some pretty wild things happened there, but the more you study history, you find out that this is a commonality. The kings have their problems. There's always some kind of overthrow. There's always multiple leaders seizing the throne, and then lo and behold, you find out there's like 3 guys that are all ruling here all over the place that nobody realized. Then you find out that certain people were ruling in place that were the actual power from somewhere else, and this is a commonality. But why it is that I kind of point out the Persian Empire and the time of the Persian Empire itself the most is because where it has the most drastic effect is with locking in the birth of Messiah. Because when you stroll along to the time of the Roman Empire, well, they based their starting date and all their numerical calculations upon one eclipse, but that eclipse they get the timing from the Greek, who claimed that a certain, what should we call this? A certain, which was during a treaty that was made with the Persian Empire. So all these timelines are actually based off of a treaty between the Persians, between the Greeks. And when one day is off, guess what? Our entire timeline has been thrown into confusion. But here's where it gets incredible. Because of the way that God has set things up, as much as they've scrambled the timeline with their own mistakes, it cannot be scrambled. That's why God goes out of his way to use these specific numerical patterns over and over and over and over again. The more you begin to recognize these patterns, the more you begin to recognize these numbers, 1335, 1290, 1260, 42 months, time, times, and a half a time, 70, 70, 70, 80, 10, 10. I can keep going here, folks. You'll automatically begin to understand why they're there, how this timeline works, how it has always worked. And it's my hope that we can get people to start understanding the reality of how these events are going to take place, their placement, and clear up some of this confusion that's, with many of the, good everyday people that are trying to figure this stuff out. Hopefully, this begins to start helping clear up the matter.
Clearing up this matter. What a perfect way to put that. So much confusion with the timeline. Not only chronologically speaking with the timeline, but temporally speaking of the timeline. Of course, when Brian first took a look at this, this temporally, quantitatively, as a sequential series of events backed up with history, he had no idea what he's going to find. I had no idea what he was going to find. When he sent me the chart, because he made a chart, ladies and gentlemen, but don't forget, I've taken psychology. Page 1 of this chart is in 2 columns, but thereafter it's in 3. And I just asked him, Bri, why did you change your train of thought? How did you do that? How did you go from 2-dimensional thinking to 3-dimensional thinking? You normally can't do that. That leads to confusion. And of course, once you look at the chart, you realize something else was obviously leading Brian's hands. The only thing that I could do was just look dumbfoundedly at it, as he called it himself. I don't know what to call it except the Mina scale, and how correct he is. But when you ask the normal run-of-the-mill Christian, the first thing they want to know, no matter what you say about the timeline, the only thing they really want to know is when's the rapture. Now, this goes against the backdrop. Of course, it was released today. There was, or not today, this year. There, of course, was a study released, and Ladies and gentlemen, roughly a little bit more, but only 1/3 of the people that call themselves Christians say there's going to be a rapture. So, how is it that this minority overwhelms the end time eschatological teaching? How is that? Absolutely amazing. Because when people write me, much like this week, they realize that, wait a minute, it took me 3 months just to get that word out of my vocabulary, because if you write me an email, ladies and gentlemen, including the word rapture, I'm going to return it to you. At the end, I will put, do not ask me about the rapture. That's my reply. Sometimes, these are like, 200-300 words long. I put in there, remove the word rapture, send it back to me. Usually it takes 3 or 4 times, and most people just give up. They won't edit their question and send it back to me, because I need a basis in reality because of the Bible source code, taking me all the way back to, of course, my elder, Brother Webster. Rapture is not in the Bible. And what does that word mean in Greek? Well, it means rape. It means rape. That's why it's only used, that word is only used in conjunction, of course, with ravenous wolves. When you use harpazo and harpage together, it's only used in conjunction with wolves. That's the only time that those two phrases are used together. And people don't even realize that that's not what that verse says. It doesn't say harpazo, it says harpage. And they even refuse to look at it. So you need a basis in fact. And that's what I'm going to be delivering to you today, the Brianite. These temporal integers are inside this chapter. Not only that, all over this chapter, all of them temporal integers are here. So it's key critical that just the little key things that we've thrown out so far, just like Brian brought out. By the way, boys and girls, Saul wasn't first. No, he wasn't. No, he wasn't. So, and the simple fact that this has a parable in it. This is parabolic prophecy. There's a reason for that. And it blows my mind that the 2 greatest parables nobody even knows about, they won't even talk about, because the 2 greatest parables are from the Old Testament, but they're only referenced, they're called parables in the book of Hebrews. So the first is, of course, Genesis chapter 2, or 22. That's the greatest parable. The second is like it. It's, of course, the tabernacle. But if you don't know that in the book of Hebrews, in the Greek, it calls those 2 things parables, you don't realize they're parabolic prophecies. Well, this one that we're going to cover today, you probably haven't thought to even think about it, but we're going to think about it really definitively today. Right now I'm looking at the New American Standard Bible electronically. Its first break is, of course, verse 22. And believe me, those first 21 verses are absolutely mind-boggling, jam-packed with information. So when you realize that even this version that I'm looking at here divides this chapter into twins, that's pretty amazing. But it's a whole lot of verses. It's a whole lot of information to try to cover in one breath, so to speak.
And Abimelech, the son of Jeroboam, went to Shechem, to his mother's relatives, and spoke to them and to the whole clan of the household of his mother's father, saying, Speak now in the hearing of all the leaders of Shechem. Which is better for you, that 70 men, all the sons of Jeroboam, rule over you, or that one man rules over you? Also, remember that I am your bone and your flesh. And his mother's relatives spoke all of the words on his behalf in the hearing of all the leaders of Shechem, and they were inclined to follow Abimelech, for they said, he is our relative. They gave him 70 pieces of silver from the houses of Baal Bereth, with which Abimelech hired worthless and reckless fellows, and they followed him. Then he went to his father's house at Ophrah, and killed his brothers, the sons of Jerubbaal, 70 men on one stone. But Jotham the youngest, son of Jerubbaal, was left, for he had hid himself. All the men of Shechem and all Beth Millo assembled together, and they went and made Abimelech king by the oak of the pillar, which was in Shechem. All right, folks, so I hope everybody noticed there already alone. We've had 70 mentioned 3 times. All right, let's go on to the next stanza, starting in verse 7. Now when they told Jotham, he went and stood on the top of Mount Gerizim, and he lifted his voice and called out. Thus he said to them, Listen to me, O men of Shechem, that God may listen to you. Once the trees went forth to anoint a king over them, and they said to the olive tree, Reign over us. But the olive tree said to them, Shall I leave my fatness, with which God and men are honored, and go to wave over the trees? Then the tree said to the fig tree, You come reign over us. But the fig tree said to them, Shall I leave my sweetness and my good fruit, and go to wave over the trees? Then the tree said to the vine, You come reign over us. But the vine said to them, Shall I leave my new wine, which cheers God and men, and go to wave over the trees? Finally, all the trees said to the bramble, You come reign over us. The bramble said to the trees, If in truth you are anointing me as king over you, come and take my refuge in my shade. But if not, may fire come out from the bramble and consume the cedars of Lebanon. Do you want to stop there at this stanza and talk a little bit on this, Matthew? Okay, let's move on then. Let me get the program caught up here with where I'm at. So starting here at verse 16. We'll just kind of slide that up so I don't have to adjust it again. Verse 16, Now therefore, if you have dealt in truth and in integrity in making Abimelech king, and if you have dealt well with Jerubbaal and his house, and have dealt well with him as he deserved, for my father fought for you, and risked his life, and delivered you from the land of Midian. But you have risen against my father's house today, and have killed his sons. Okay, folks, here's another 70. 70 men, and one stone, and have made Abimelech the son of his maidservant king over the men of Shechem, because he is your relative. Then if you have dealt in truth and integrity with Jerubbaal and his house this day, rejoice in Abimelech, and let him also rejoice in you. But if not, let fire come out from Abimelech and consume the men of Shechem and Beth Millo, and let fire come out from the men of Shechem and from Beth Millo and consume Abimelech. Then Jotham escaped and fled, and went to Beer, and remained there because Abimelech his brother. All right, we're in the next stanza, in verse 22. Now Abimelech ruled over Israel 3 years. Then God sent an evil spirit. Abimelech and the men of Shechem dealt treacherously with Abimelech. so that violence done to the 70 sons of Jeroboam might come, and their blood might be laid on Abimelech, their brother, who killed them, and on the men of Shechem, who strengthened his hands to kill his brothers. The men of Shechem set men in ambush against him on the tops of the mountains, and they robbed all who might pass by them along the road, and it was told to Abimelech. One more 70 added in there, everybody. Verse 26. Now Gal, the son of Ebed, came with his relatives and crossed over into Shechem, and the men of Shechem put their trust in him. They went out into the field and gathered the grapes of the vineyards and trod them and held a festival, and they went into their house of their God and ate and drank and cursed Abimelech. Then Gal, the son of Ebed, said, Who is Abimelech? Who is Shechem, that we should serve him? If he is not the son of Jeroboam, and is Zebul not his lieutenant, serve the men of Hamor, the father of Shechem. But why would we serve him? Would therefore this people were under my authority, then I would remove Abimelech. And he said to Abimelech, Increase your army and come out. All right, now we're going into the next stanza. This is verse 30. Adjusting this here for everyone to see. When Zebul, the ruler of the city, heard the words of Gal, the son of Ebed, his anger burned. He sent messengers to Abimelech, deceitfully saying, Behold, Gal, the son of Ebed, and his relatives have come to Shechem. And behold, they are stirring up the city against you. Now therefore arise by night, you and the people who are with you, and lie in wait in the field. In the morning, as soon as the sun is up, you shall rise early and rush upon the city. And behold, when he and the people who are with him come out against you, you shall do to them whatever you can. So Abimelech and all the people who were with him arose by night and lay in wait against Shechem in 4 companies. Now Gal, the son of Ebed, went out and stood in the entrance of the city gate, and Abimelech and the people who were with him arose from the ambush. When Gal saw the people, he said to Zebul, Look, people are coming down from the top of the mountains. But Zebul said to him, If you are seeing the shadow of the mountains, as if they were men. Gal spoke again and said, Behold, people are coming down from the highest part of the land, and one company comes by the way of the diviner's oak. Then Zebul said to him, Where is your boasting now with which you said, Who is Abimelech that we should serve him? If this not the people whom you despised, go out now and fight with them. Gal went out before the leaders of Shechem and fought with Abimelech. Abimelech chased him and fled before him, and many fell wounded up to the entrance of the gate. Then Abimelech remained at Arumah, but Zebul drove out Gal and his relatives so that they should not remain in Shechem. All right, on to verse 4. Now it came about the next day that the people went out to the field, and it was told to Abimelech. So he took his people and divided them into 3 companies and lay in wait in the field. When he looked and saw the people coming out from the city, he arose against them and slew them. Then Abimelech and the company who was with him dashed forward and stood in the entrance of the city gate. The other 2 companies then dashed against all who were in the field and slew them. Abimelech fought against the city all that day, and he captured the city and killed the people who were in it. Then he razed the city and sowed it with salt. On to verse 46. When all the leaders of the tower of Shechem heard of it, they entered the inner chamber of the temple of El-Berith. It was told Abimelech that all the leaders of the tower of Shechem were gathered together. So Abimelech went up to Mount Zalmunna, he and all the people who were with him, and Abimelech took an axe in his hand and cut down a branch from the trees and lifted it and laid it on his shoulder. Then he said to the people who were with him, "What you have seen me do, hurry and do likewise." All the people also cut down each one his branch and followed Abimelech, and put them on the inner chamber, and set the inner chamber on fire over those inside, so that all the men of the tower of Shechem also died, about 1,000 men and women. Then Abimelech went to Thebez, and he camped against Thebez and captured it. But there was a strong tower in the center of the city. All the men and women with all the leaders of the city fled there and shut themselves in. And they went up on the roof of the tower. So Abimelech came to the tower and fought against it, and approached the entrance of the tower to burn it with fire. But a certain woman threw an upper millstone on Abimelech's head, crushing his skull. Then he called quickly to the young man, his armor bearer, and said to him, "Draw your sword and kill me, so that it will not be said of me, a woman slew him." So the young man pierced him through and died. When the men of Israel saw that Abimelech was dead, each departed to his home. Thus God repaid the wickedness of Abimelech, which he had done to his father in killing his 70 brothers. Also God returned all the wickedness of the men of Shechem on their heads, and the curse of Jotham, the son of Jeroboam, came upon them.
Oh my goodness, ladies and gentlemen, absolutely off the charts if you couldn't hear what was going on there. Let me say this first. If you cannot see Ezekiel, the 31st chapter here, you need to take a look at that. Let me say this. Verse 3 of Ezekiel 31, "Behold, Assyria was a cedar in Lebanon, with beautiful branches and forest shade, very high, and its top was among the clouds. The waters made it grow, the deep made it high. With its rivers it continually extended all around its planting place, and sent out its channels to all the trees of the field. Therefore its height was loftier than all of the trees of the field, and its boughs became many and its branches long, because of the many waters as it spread them out. All the birds of the heavens nested in its boughs and under its branches. All the beasts of the field gave birth, and all the great nations lived under its shade. It was so beautiful in its greatness and its length of its branches, for its roots extended to many waters. The cedars in God's garden could not match it. The cypresses could not compare to its boughs, and the plane trees could not match its branches. No tree in God's garden could compare with its beauty." Now, ladies and gentlemen, I think I've read enough of that for you to get the point. You need to finish reading that prophecy, because that's one of the reasons why this chapter is plainly describing the tribulation trigger. Very plainly. Take note. Listen, something that will immediately get your attention here, this stone. You'll take note. You heard Brian say that the treachery was done upon one stone. Obviously, a sacrifice. But when you get down to verse 53, if you can't see what God actually said, you don't realize that he uses that same word again, only there in the New American Standard Bible, it switched it. It said a certain woman. No, it said one woman, the exact same word it used for the one stone. You'll take note that there's two towers here. You see these two towers, of course, in the book of Obadiah. Same story, same situation. Now, of course, it gave us a whole lot more information there in Ezekiel chapter 31 prophetically, so I didn't read it all. Quite simply too much to cover. But you got that the first tower, everybody was in it, it was burnt to the ground. Not only that, its city was sown with salt. The second tower encounter didn't go too well. There was one woman cast down a stone from the top and killed him. Put an end to him. This one woman is that exact phrase is in another prophecy in the Bible. It's a prophecy that Brian and I have not talked about publicly. I do not reckon in my mind. We've talked about it privately before. But ladies and gentlemen, that one woman is in, of course, Zechariah, the 5th chapter and verse 7. I'll read it to you. And behold, a great lead cover was lifted up, and this a woman sitting inside the ephah. So, ladies and gentlemen, you might want to take a look at that prophecy, and it's a very popular one. Of course, many people run around that don't know what they're talking about and say that this is a female angelic entity. No, it's not. It's not at all. But if you couldn't see what God was actually said with his own mouth, if you couldn't read the Hebrew, you wouldn't realize that that exact phrase, that one woman, of course, like I said, New American Standard Bible, in verse 53 of Judges chapter 9, it says a certain woman, because I don't want you to see it. But, ladies and gentlemen, this is very important that God's magnified this to us. He's provided that that sequence there, that one woman phrase. Now, we can even go farther than that, because when we look into the Bible source code, that exact Hebrew phrase winds up in the New Testament, of course, in Luke chapter 7 and verse 37. And there was a woman in the city who was a sinner, and she learned that he was reclining at the table in the Pharisee's house. She brought an alabaster vial of perfume. There you have it again, the exact phrase that's used in Judges 9, Zechariah 5. It's also used again in 1 Timothy chapter 3, verse 2, in a different light. But this is very important that we realize this whole chapter about that one stone that everybody was sacrificed upon, and then one woman took a stone and, of course, slayed the antagonist. These two towers, one that fell, one that did not. But when you begin to look at everything in this chapter, oh my goodness, ladies and gentlemen, there is so many prophetic things going on in this chapter. It's absolutely off the charts. You take note that it mentions the 70, but of course there's 72. There was the brother that escaped, and of course there was the antagonist. So there's actually 72. A lot of people have asked me about this. And you'll take note, well, what happened to his son? Where did his son go? What happened with him? Absolutely off the charts. All of the information contained in here is just whopping. Let me go ahead and bring up the alphanumerical equations in here so you can take a look at my document yourself. Just take note that the entire verse of verse 50 is 1335. You'll take note that it's also there in verse 36. It's in 43. As far as 1290 is concerned, that's the entire 14th verse. Absolutely off the charts. Verse 9. Of course, verse 49. The royal count is contained herein. Now remember, there is the standard count and the royal count. That's when the 5 final forms are increased in value. But the royal count for 1290 is in 51. When you get to the 1260 temporal integer, it's twice in verse 2. It's in verse 5. 22. It's in 31. It's in 50. It's in 51. It's in 52. It's in 56. The royal count for 1260 is in verse 33. When we get to the 2300 temporal count, it's in 15. The royal count puts it in verse 33. It's in 45. 56. Then we get to the 2 integers that everybody wants to talk about. 666 is in here exactly twice, ladies and gentlemen. Once in the standard count, once in the royal count. And you will take note that it's pretty important where it's at. Those things taken into account, it is obviously pointing you, temporally speaking, to something that's going to divide time itself. A time when he who sitteth upon the throne gets up and, temporally speaking, submerges creation in a temporal shockwave. So, ladies and gentlemen, there is one temporal integer that is not here. I mean, if 666 is here, all of you that are my normal listeners are dying to know, where's 144? It's not here. It's not here no more than the word children is in Judges chapter 9. Even though it went way out to tell you about the people that were slaughtered in that tower. 1,000 of them, men and women. And of course, that means there was children there, but shh. God kept that quiet. He kept that quiet for a reason. Because that is, of course, the tribulation trigger. The book of Obadiah comes right out and tells you about these 2 towers in great detail. Revelation chapter 14 gives you great detail who's going to ascend one of those towers and who does not. So, ladies and gentlemen, you're not going to find 144 in this chapter, but you do find 666 twice, once in standard count and once in royal count. That should get your attention. That's important. By the way, speaking of angelic entities, of course, you realize that prophetically what it brings to mind is, of course, 1/3 of the host of heaven fall. You see, because it looked like men coming down. But the treacherous one said, no, that's just shadows. Ah, yes, the treacherous one. You're supposed to see that he is part of Beelzebul. You're supposed to see that because he really had no beef in this conflict. You realize that he went treacherous only because he got angry at somebody else's words. He didn't have a dog in this fight. Did you catch that? Did you catch it? Because when you look through the text, of course, you realize it was this Zebul that done everything here. And the only reason why he did it was because he got angry. It's the only reason why he did it. Verse 30. Then Zebul, the ruler of the city, heard the words of Gaal, the son of Ebed. His anger burned. It's the only reason why all of this happened. Why are the 70 mentioned here? Of course, everybody wants to talk about the angelic host, which are numbered in 70 according to the nations. You're supposed to know. If you don't know the intricacies of this chapter, you of course can't perceive what happens to those 70 princes during the 1,000-year reign of Christ. You can't see that far. You can't see that far. Brian, back to you. Your thoughts. Whatever's jumped in your mind. Let's get.
I was just actually thinking over some odds and ends I caught in there, and I think it's rather ironic that you brought up of the princes set people. Something that talks about they went there, and then they had the divining oak. Got these mountains, got these. Okay, my mind's already thinking in a different direction because of what I'm working on in the background. If you kind of roll your head backwards to when we did the Wings of the North, I sort of leapt out of the gate on that program a little disturbed at the information that we were going to reveal that day. Now, what I have found since that time that confirms everything we said in there is quite unbelievable. But to make matters, I would say, altogether even more interesting, you're getting all the information right here in this chapter on top of it of what we are to look for when it is he that comes up out of the pit, and those whom are already serving him, not to even mention its location. I felt I was making a reach when we did the Wings of the North. Problem is now, all of the stuff that I've come across and have been working on here in the background, well, every single thing we said in the Wings of the North has been emboldened and amplified 1,000-fold. Not to even mention the same region going right up into Xinjiang, China, up into the Altai Mountains. I can now state emphatically, without hesitation, that in ancient times when they talked about the Mount of Assembly where the angels came down, where the gods came down, beyond any shadow of a doubt, it was in this location, in the Altai Mountains. Beyond any shadow of a doubt, that scapegoat is sitting there in a place that's surrounded by mountains, by rare trees, sea monsters, reports of areas that are so magnetically charged just because of what's going on in the ground and above that if anybody walks in there, they're instantaneously nuked. Millions of animals have been lost in there over the course of time. People have walked in there and have been killed and have completely vanished. This, unfortunately, there's no end in sight to all the information I have now found concerning what's going on there in the Altai and what is going on in that very specific region. And every single thing that we're going to release here in an upcoming program is all a type and a shadow of every single thing that is being said in this chapter. So much so that as we're sitting here doing this program, it's really beginning to sink into my mind how much is really here, prophetically speaking, concerning what is to come.
Brian, I absolutely agree with everything that you say, but ladies and gentlemen, let's go back to the book of Asaph. Okay, let's just read 8 verses, and we mentioned these 70 princes. And well, what happens to these 70 princes during the millennial reign of Christ? Riddle me, what happens to them? Let's get to the book of Asaph. Now, I'm going to start reading after the Salah moment here in this chapter. So I will start here in verse 3. Vindicate the weak, the fatherless, do justice to the afflicted and the destitute. Rescue the weak, the needy, deliver them out of the hand of the wicked. And of course, as far as Judges chapter 9 is concerned, that would be Abimelech. Verse 5. They do not know, nor do they understand. They walk about in darkness. All of the foundations of the earth are shaken. Now, right there, you should know. This is the great day of he who sitteth upon the throne. And he's getting ready to tell you that point blank. I said, you are gods, and all of you are sons of the Most High. Nevertheless, you will die like men, and fall like any one of the princes. Verse 8. The 6th seal, of course. The Tribulation Trigger. Arise, O God, judge of the earth, for it is you who possesses all of the nations. Ladies and gentlemen, point blank. Point blank. So in reference to these 70 princes, what happens to them? Everybody will try to lie to you, and well, they'll actually try to infer that the Lord your God is lying, but let's just read what he said. Let's read what he actually said. And the beast was seized, and with him the false prophet, who performed the signs in his presence, by which he deceived those who had received the mark of the beast, and those who worshipped his image. These two, okay, these two, just those two, okay, just the beast and his false prophet, okay, just the scapegoat and the Assyrian. That's what he just said. These two were thrown alive into the lake of fire which burns with brimstone. And the rest were killed with the sword which came from the mouth of him who sat on the horse. And all the birds were filled with their flesh. So any Bible teacher that's ever told you that the stars that fall with the dragon, you're of course told this, and Revelation chapter 12. We better get over there right now. I don't want to misquote anything. I mean, we need to go over there and take a look at it. This is what God said then. Then another sign appeared in heaven, and behold, a great red dragon, having 7 heads and 10 horns. On his heads were 7 diadems, and his tail swept away a third of the stars of heaven and threw them to the earth. And the dragon stood before the woman who was about to give birth, so that when she gave birth, he might devour her child. Of course, Emmanuel. This is why the Emmanuel prophecies of Isaiah chapter 7 and 8 are the days of future past and present. And if you can't see that far, that's why you're going to lie and say that all of these 1/3 of the stars that fell with Satan, they're thrown into the lake of fire. No, that's a lie. God took multiple verses to make sure that you know just the scapegoat and the Assyrian would be thrown into the lake of fire. He was pretty clear in saying that. He never mentioned the 70. Never mentioned them at all. So if you don't know all these things up front, these flights of fancy can deceive you. But when you know what is to come, when you know which tower you're in Judges chapter 9, when you know which woman it is that you are, of course there's nothing to be concerned about. You'll know, you'll be able to go back to Judges, of course. Even if you don't know the book of Asaph, you'll be able to go back to Judges chapter 9 and realize exactly what happened. You'll realize that, well, the first tower, of course, was burned. That's not what happened to the second tower, ladies and gentlemen. That's not what happened. You'll take note that even here you're told about the Lord's axe, because the antagonist goes and picks up an axe and fulfills this parable about the trees, about the cedars, about the bramble. That's why when you continued reading through the Bible, if you were faithful, by the time you got to Ezekiel chapter 31, it would literally explode off the page what he's talking about. No question about who, what, where, and when he's talking about. There's only one axe. That axe is clearly defined by God himself to be the Assyrian. There's no arguing with that fact as far as the Bible source code is concerned. So, just take note. What is the second tower called? Where's it at? It's, of course, at Thebes. What does that mean? Have you ever questioned it? What does that mean? Of course, when you bring up most Strong's dictionaries, it'll say they don't know. It'll say of uncertain usage, an unknown root. Several of them will say this right out of the Strong's. It, of course, means whiteness. It means it has been made clean, ladies and gentlemen. It's amazing when you go to the library and start taking off different Strongs off the shelf, you can find some of them will say, we don't know what it is, but other ones will clearly say that this is from the root word, of course, goats. That's cotton. That's white. These people from this place has made their garments white. That's why they're gathered at this particular tower. Now look, what was the name of this tower? What was this place? I mean, surely there's something here that's going to tell you. And it's right here in the midst of everything that is so absolutely amazing when you're able to look into the Bible source code. And we're just talking about the Hebrew tonight. Me and Bri haven't even touched the Greek, which is, it's so wonderful, it's hard to perceive. Brian, did you have something you wanted to add to
Well,
this?
just in a split second here, you just mentioned cotton. You just mentioned tower. This strikes me as very interesting. I've been going through a documentary on the Oxus River, which they entitled and called it the Gehan because it was the crazy river. But the man that's doing this documentary, he goes through and explains that when Alexander the Great and his soldiers were coming into Central Asia, they came upon for the very first time, they found cotton. And they were just so completely freaked out and fascinated by the stuff that they started filling their pockets with it. So here these guys are running around with all this cotton in their pockets, which is... So when you said that, that struck me. And then you're talking about a tower. There's something in there I got to go back and watch again. Because I'm like on my second run through of that set of documentaries. That guy put so much material in there.
Well, absolutely, and we can talk about that a little bit because you know this tower, Bry, there in verse 51. Well, ladies and gentlemen, if you take note of the verses that I mentioned, there's something very important in verse 51, and it's more than just a little bit important, because, ladies and gentlemen, there's something you should know about all these Hebrew words. And if you can't look into the Bible source code, if you can't see what it is, you'll take note, ladies and gentlemen, that this implements the royal count. It implements the royal count. So I'll just show it to you. In this phrase, the strong tower, the word for strong is Oz. Ladies and gentlemen, it's Oz. That's why this must implement the royal measure to accomplish this particular count. Ladies and gentlemen, this is an inversion because the root word for the scapegoat is Oz. But if you can't see the Bible source code, you can't see what God's doing. It's too wonderful for you. You can't perceive it. So, just with that in mind, I hope just these last 10 minutes have encouraged you that you need to look deeper. Even from the Strongs, you need to get multiple variations of the Strongs, because like I said, I mean, I can even show you here. In this version, which is the New American Standard Exhaustive Concordance, what does it say about Thebes? It says they don't have a clue. Look over at Mickelson. What does it say? Ah, yes, here it tells you. It means cotton. Well, it goes about the long way, I bet you. Yeah, here it is. Cotton. That's the root. That's what the root is. So, with that in mind, ladies and gentlemen, I just showed you two different dictionaries that said one. They didn't want you to know that those people that had gathered at this second tower were as white as cotton. They had made their garments white. Absolutely amazing and off the charts. Everything that, don't matter what Brian says, one of those verses he's going to mention has an temporal integer impregnated within it. Here, let me show you what this is all about, shall I? Shall I show you what this is all about? Because, really, you need to get ready for the great day of he who sitteth upon the throne. That's really what all of you need to be doing. So it's very important that you can see exactly where all of these things go. It's absolutely important that you know some things. Man, I'm very hesitant to talk about everything that I know concerning these temporal integers.
The reason that I use the logo that we use, this is representing the great day of he who sits upon the throne when he rides upon that wave, which is the exact thing that Matthew just showed you in that animation. This is why I use this. You see, Bands of Time, that's half of the name. It's lightning divides the bands of time. And right here, this image is no different than that one. Now I want to go back in here and touch on a couple of things real fast. I want to explain something quickly because a lot of people sort of get up in arms. Well, you guys are using the quote-unquote gematria. Isn't that numerology? Isn't that bad? All right, guys, we need to clear something up first so that people understand this. You need to go back to your history books and look and see when it is that they started using what we refer to as numerals or numbers, as in the modern numbering system we have today. The history books will emphatically tell you that it was created during the Islamic period by an Arabian person, and that's how numbers came about. Not anywhere ever in history prior to that time were numbers used. Everything was accounted through alphanumerics, meaning each letter had a number. For instance, this is the riddle of Mina Mina Tekel Ufar Sin. They're telling you right there, okay, this is a letter, a number, an account. That's why we are able to use these alphanumeric calculations to bring further understanding and clarity to what the Bible is saying. Okay, these places where you see like a 1 and a 2 and a 6 and a 0, that's not how counting was done in ancient times. So now that we can clear that out of the water and kind of remove that little concept in everybody's mind so they stop going, well, that's numerology, that's evil, blah, blah, blah. No, this is how things have always worked until the Arabian man brought up what we have as a number. Now, to go back over, I wanted to touch on a couple of different things here. Chapter 12 here, because actually this had just come up in discussion. Actually, there's two little key things I want to touch on in here over in Revelation chapter 12. This actually has come up in discussion in my house over the last few days when, unfortunately, the person that we have just met found out that in my house, the word rapture, it is a swear word and it's not allowed in our house. And I told her about the Latin etymology of that word, and she was stunned. So she kind of looked at me and said, well, what's going to happen? And I said, well, let's have a little chit-chat about Revelation 12, because it specifically tells you what happens. You know, as we started going through the discussion, she said, well, it says that they go on, that the beast goes on to make war with, and I said, yes, but now it's time for me to point out something very crucial to you. There's two sets of people that are named right here in Revelation 12, and I guarantee you've not heard anybody ever tell you this. If you look here in starting at verse 7, for instance, it's right here in verse 11 is where it's at, but let's read the whole stanza real fast. And there was a war in heaven. Michael and his angels fought against the dragon. The dragon fought and his angels and prevailed not. Neither was their place found any more in heaven. And the great dragon was cast out, that old serpent called the devil and Satan, which deceives the whole world. He was cast out into the earth, and his angels were cast out with him. And I heard a loud voice saying in heaven, now is come salvation and strength, and the kingdom of our God, and the power of his Christ. For the accuser of our brothers is cast down, which accused them before our God day and night. They overcame him by the blood of the Lamb and by the word of their testimony. Now take note of what it says here. And they loved not their lives, even faced with death. Okay, guys, ladies and gentlemen, this is the first group of people. Therefore rejoice, you heavens, you that dwell in them. Woe to the inhabitants of the earth and of the sea, for the devil is come down to you having great wrath, because he knows that he has but a short time. Now we move into the next stanza. And when the dragon saw that he was cast to the earth, he persecuted the woman which brought forth the man-child. And to the woman were given 2 wings of a great eagle, that she might fly into the wilderness, into her place where she is nourished for a time, and a times, and a half time, from the face of the serpent. The serpent cast out of his mouth water as a flood, after the woman, that might cause her to be carried away by the flood. And the earth helped the woman, and the earth opened her mouth and swallowed up the flood which the dragon cast out of his mouth. And the dragon was wroth with the woman, and went to make war with the remnant of her seed. And what's the difference here? Which keep the commandments of God and have the testimony of Jesus Christ. The first group loved not their lives, even when faced with death. Group number 2 have kept the commandments of God and have the testimony of Jesus Christ. So what is the dividing line between these two different people? The first one loved not their lives, even when faced with death. The second one's a whole different territory. And these dragon makes war with. Now, this friend of ours asked me a very pointed question. Well, are we not going to get taken to a place of safety during the time of this? What's going on here? I don't understand. This is where, with the wings of the eagle. And, you know, my wife and I watched the latest Hobbit finally last week, and they have the nice, great big eagles coming in. I looked at my wife and I said, remember this moment, because I'm going to look at you in the future and say, look, those that love not their lives, even when faced with death, are taken to a place that has been prepared for them in the wilderness. Okay, so what everybody has been taught concerning this, that word I do not like using, doctrine, which the actual word means to seize by force or to seize booty, because if you take the Greek word and accidentally do like I did and put it into a news search, you'll find out that it keeps translating as to seize booty. So then I was asked the next infamous question, well, why is that? I said, look, everybody wants to go that no man knows the day nor the hour, etc., but they don't realize that's a direct quote from the book of Zechariah. What does it say there? It tells us specifically that when Christ comes back and he cracks the Mount of Olives, logic is going to dictate at this point of time with the amount of force involved in this. If he does not seize by force and take those which were alive and remain, everybody, you know what happens when he comes down and he cracks that mountain. Everything is obliterated in its presence. So now we can understand what the real Greek word is actually talking about, as opposed to what the small minority seems to think it says. It's two completely different things. But when you stop and look at this and look at it logically, you realize that this has been here the entire time. Sense. Now, aspect 2 I wanted to point out. We're talking about numbers here. Now, and you brought up 70. It was a little entertaining tonight because this even came up, and these poor kids probably walked away with 2 different degrees in their pocket after I got done with our discussion. That's, I guess, a little outside of that, but nonetheless, a certain symbol was brought up, you know, a 5-pointed star that is facing upwards. They call it a pentacle. And so we got in a little bit of a discussion about that, and I kind of looked at them, and I said, you're aware that that's only one half of the symbol. Well, what do you mean? I said it was always a 10-pointed star. You're just seeing one half. Well, how so? Because the earth is divided up by 10. 7, 10. Have 70. How many heads are we being shown standing over this division with these 10 horns? Okay, you got a 7 over a 10. Getting a lot of numeric, how would you say this, intervals to amplify this to you. And I suppose probably, I don't think hardly anybody out there has ever heard this said, that you've only got one part of the star, because you got the straight up one and you got the upside down one. Then you have the whole.
Yes, ladies and gentlemen, there's 2 groups that's numbered, whether you like it or not. Revelation chapter 7. After not rapture, rather relocation, all of a sudden the rest of her children now hold to the law and to the testimony. It's only then that this happens. And take note, I'm just going to show you exactly what's going on here. This is what you read in Revelation chapter 7. This is what your eyes can read. But you should have eyes that can see. We switch over to the Bible source code, of course, the Digital. What does it say? That doesn't say 144,000. That's alphanumerics. That is Rho Mu Delta 144. In the Septuagint, of course, this is the number given for Psalms 144. What does this say? Of course, I know that. That's Greek for, of course, you call that G, 5505, 1,000, but not here, ladies and gentlemen. It's spelled with a final sigma. That means this calculation in the royal count is 666. This literally says 144, 666. Literally what it says. Brian already read to you the male child, of course, Emmanuel. Of course, twice in the Bible, there's also the Emmanuel Elohim. But ladies and gentlemen, you're supposed to know this stuff. You're already supposed to know this stuff. You're already supposed to know that this group gets beheaded. They can't take the mark of the beast, ladies and gentlemen, because They've already been sealed with the seal of God. You need to read Revelation chapter 7 and understand what it says and who it's talking about. They will be beheaded, and they will become primus resurrexerit. Those, the first resurrection, they are the ones that rule with Christ for 1,000 years so you can be on your honeymoon. Of course, on the other side of God's mouth, he calls them in Hebrew the Hamsharatim. You need to know this stuff because these are the facts. This isn't fantasy. Noah wasn't raptured. A place was prepared for Noah, and he went through the flood. He was actually in the flood. You do realize that that's how a boat works. He wasn't in a submarine. He wasn't raptured. Rather, he was relocated to a place that had been prepared for him by God. This is all over the scriptures. And of course, about the male child. We can talk just a little bit about that. Let's go and look at one of the riddles of the ages, shall we? Okay, let's take a look at this prophecy right here. Because he slew me not from the womb, or that my mother might have been my grave, and her womb to be always great with me. Ladies and gentlemen, I appreciate the King James Version. That's not what the Hebrew says. That's not what the Hebrew says at all. Here's what it says. And what it says is absolutely impossible. This says things as impossible as does the parallel apocalypse. It says impossible things, things that can't be true. But, ladies and gentlemen, it literally says that his mother would have been pregnant forever. You want to know why? Do you want to know why it says that? Well, think about what is going on here, ladies and gentlemen. If you're pregnant and your baby is either not aborted, if that baby is not miscarried, and that baby is not born, if one of these three things haven't happened, you're going to be pregnant forever. You're going to be pregnant forever. The Bible is saying things that is absolutely impossible, but you're supposed to know he's talking about the Emmanuel prophecy. He's talking about the Mosheim that's going to ascend Mount Zion, just like the book of Obadiah says. That's what it says. You just have to believe what God's word says and just run with it. But if you don't believe it, he's not going to tell you. He's not going to explain it to you. Ladies and gentlemen, let's jump over here to the parallel apocalypse, okay? And you need to know what that is. But at any rate, let's go over here and read some very strange things where God talks about this exact time. You're supposed to know this is what the parallel apocalypse is actually talking about. Here it is. As the pregnant woman approaches time to give birth, she cries and cries out in labor pains. Thus, we were before you, O Lord. We were pregnant. We writhed in labor. We gave birth, as it seems, only to wind. We do not accomplish deliverance for the earth, nor were the inhabitants of the world born. Clearly talking about the group of 144,000 as detailed in Revelation chapter 14. And the very next verse, of course, is about their brothers. This is about the next group of 144,000 as detailed in Revelation chapter 7. Okay? Your dead will live. Their corpses will rise. You who lie in the dust, awake and shout for joy, for your dew is the dew as the dawn. And the earth will give birth to the departed spirits. Okay? And what time is this? This is a time you're supposed to go into that strong white tower. Come, my people, enter to your rooms, close the doors behind you, hide for a little while until the indignation runs its course. Do you know what he's talking about? You need to know what he's talking about. For behold, the Lord is about to come out from his place to punish the inhabitants of the earth for their iniquity, and the earth will reveal her bloodshed, no longer cover her slain. That's because the Bible has always said, from beginning to end, this one very thing, ladies and gentlemen. During the tribulation, the only way you can die is to be beheaded. The only way you can be beheaded is if you've been sealed in Revelation chapter 7. But once you're beheaded, you don't die. You're going to live forever. Of course, you're going to be primus resurrexoric. You're going to be the Hamsharatim. That group of 144,000, you are just plainly told in multiple chapters, in multiple ways. By the way, alphanumerically too, but I didn't tell you that little secret. Even though I showed it to you, you couldn't see it. But anyway. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm telling you facts. I'm telling you absolutely everything you need to know. And if you don't know these things, then you should be afraid. You really should be afraid. Because your faith's going to snap like a twig. When God kicks us off our 23.4 degree axis. He's going to, by the way. He is going to. And there's going to be the woman. There's going to be her 144,000 male child. And there's going to be the 144,000 rest of her children. Rest of her children. You see, this is why when Korah's rebellion happens in the wilderness again, Brian read it for you. It plainly said right there, Korah's rebellion is going to happen again, and the earth's going to open up again, and they're going to get swallowed. However, they get spewed out into the outer darkness. That's what Christ was talking about. You should know that. You should know that by now. I mean, I just read it in the parallel apocalypse. The earth will no longer cover her blood or her slain. So they get puked out in the outer darkness. But see, they haven't been sealed. You see. They're not the rest of her children. They were not sealed. We need to read that again. You need to see it with your eyes and understand what it is you're looking at. Brian did not read Revelation chapter 7, and I showed it to you, but we obviously need to go back there very quickly and take a look at it and see what it says. The very verse, oh, ladies and gentlemen, you'll take note that the four companies from Judges chapter 9. After this I saw four angels standing at the four corners of the earth, holding back the four winds of the earth, so that the wind would blow on the earth, or the trees, or the sea. Well, ladies and gentlemen, you need to know what causes the jet stream. It's because you're on a 23.4 degree axial tip. So once God kicks you off that and you go back to the days of Noah, there's not going to be any wind. That's what he just said, by the way. Verse 2. And I saw another angel ascending from the rising of the sun. He didn't say east. That's not what he said. Having the seal of the living God, and he cried out with a loud voice to the four angels to whom it was granted to harm the earth and the sea, saying, do not harm the earth or the sea or the trees until we have sealed the bondservants of our God on their foreheads. I already read this to you in the Bible source code. It says alphanumerically. Now, here, let me show you again. This is the Greek. That does not say 144. And let me show you the lie that the Strongs will show you. No. Does that look like that word? What is that? That's RMD in English. That's got nothing to do with what they're pronouncing. No, that's a lie. You're being lied to. This is an alphanumerical equation. 144, 666. That's what it is. Sorry for the interruption. You obviously need to know about these people. Now here he goes on to describe the tribes of Israel. However, of course, if you can't see alphanumerically what he's saying here, you're going to be quite confused. However, now you understand how it is that the only way you can die is to be beheaded. This is the rest of her children right here. Two completely separate groups. But their younger brothers who will rule over them, it is really quite emphatic who gets taken to Mount Zion. Okay? And they are sealed differently, you see, because they have his name and his father's name. This group is special. Of course, they're extremely special. God went through great lengths to explain to you, what are you if you haven't been born, if you haven't been aborted, or if you hadn't been miscarried? What are you? You're Mosheim. That's what you are. It always said that. Never said anything else. Of course, prophetically, the Mosheim are mentioned again in Nehemiah chapter 7. They're described as judges there. That was provided. Temporally speaking, it says will be provided. But you'd have to be able to see the Bible source code to know that. Anyway, now I've rambled on some. And I've probably got kind of emotional or upset because I know I'm going to get more emails in the future that will contain the word rapture. And just so you know, this is what I do. Brian taught me how to hit Control F. I didn't know how to do that before. So I bring up the emails full screen. I hit Control F. R-A. Yeah. Spell rapture. If it's in there, I just get my standard copy and paste. Don't ask me about the rapture, and I send it back to you. Don't have time for it. Okay, I have brothers and sisters that are very dear to me. Okay? I have trouble keeping up with them. I mean, it's funny. I don't get no emails from Korea about being raped. I mean, I have gotten a few from Russia. I've gotten a few, more than a few from, well, it's always the West. You know, England, Australia. But just amazes me. Look, I'm going to Control F your email. So just so you know from now on, do not send me an email containing the word rape. God's not going to rape you. He's not. He's going to relocate you. That's what he said. That's what he said. He says he's going to relocate you. But it's amazing to me that you can't even find anybody that will even approach Jeremiah chapter 20, verse 17. You can't be pregnant forever. Yet you were supposed to know that. And at what point in time, it's only today, ladies and gentlemen, don't you know the history of abortion? Ladies and gentlemen, if somebody would have aborted an Assyrian baby, oh my goodness, that was the highest crime ever. It was that way for thousands of years, ladies and gentlemen. I mean, even dogs don't abort their own children. No, that's just us. That's just today. That's only today. You live in a suicidal society. That's what you live in. I'm sorry about that. In addition to that, you all need to know, if this is the first time you've ever listened to me or whatever, you do need to know that the in vitro capital of the world is the state of Israel. I'm not lying to you. Please look it up. There's a reason for that as well.
Just clear this up quick before everybody gets even more upset. I have the etymology sitting here right in broad daylight. You can look and see. Rapture, noun, act of carrying off, from Middle French, rapture, from Medieval Latin, raptura, seizure, rape, kidnapping. Carrying off, abduction, snatching away, rape. Okay, everybody, I think you get the picture. Now, wanted to point out something else. This is just even the standard Wikipedia will bring this up. You will find out. The massacre of the innocents, what we refer to as the slaughter of the innocents. It happened at the time of Moses, all the children 2 years and under, and at the time of the birth of Messiah. It states right here where I've got it outlined. I'm going to say what it really should say. Egyptian sources raised the number to 144,000 and placed the event on the 29th of December. Let me ask a quick question here, everybody. Where did Joseph and Mary go with Messiah? Where did they go with Jesus when he was a child? They went to Egypt. Maybe we should take the record serious that these people in Egypt had given. Because where did the Exodus happen to when it happened the first time around the ride? Egypt. So now we're able to touch at least on those two.
I must interject, though, here. Okay? Throughout all of history, everybody knows Brian. That trek would have taken them 10 days. Because everybody knows, I mean, ladies and gentlemen, I know this comes to a surprise to you, but the standard mode of travel on planet Earth has been walking for like thousands of years. I mean, really, automobiles is a very late innovation, and everybody knows that laden with women and children and baggage, everybody knows you can go 20 miles a day. If you map out from where they were at to Egypt's border, it's 200 miles. It took them 10 days, just so you know. Brian, back to you.
Well, and I'll even give a bit of a shameless plug here. My wife and I actually sat down and watched Young Messiah last week because I already knew ahead of time that this was from the book that Anne Rice had written. I believe it was called Christ Out of Egypt. Don't quote me on that. And I already knew it was from Anne's book, so knowing that full well, I wanted to see it. And the entire movie is exactly about everything we have just spoken about in there, in broad daylight. Is
just
the
so
100.
everybody knows, I'm going to interrupt you because you need to know this. Anne Rice was a Christian until the Crusaders beheaded her. Go ahead.
Well, yeah, and she is now as well, okay? She went through a rough patch. That happens to us. Nonetheless, yes, and I've read a mass majority of Anne's books, and there's so much going on within them. That's all a different story. Nonetheless, that entire movie, the whole premise of that movie is about the slaughter of the innocents. The entirety of it. And I loved how it was encoded in there that they had went there 7 years prior to the death of Herod, which most standardly would date at about 5 BC is your standard time frame they put that in. Well, if you add 5 and 7, guess what? You get the 12 BC birthday. There was definitely
Ah, yes, just in time for the rise of Pontificus Maximus.
Maximus.
Oh, yes, I know.
Change time.
That's right. Sorry for the interruption, Bry.
Not a problem. I mean, I was just pointing out that there's so much in this movie. Folks really need to sit down and watch it because it will definitely shed light and really get you to understand why it is that we keep trying to get you to understand the children. This, this new friend of ours, I told her that a long time ago. We've never really got to that, but I told her that tucked away in her mind because it's going to be coming. Now, you've seen with your own eyes just from the Egyptian records, there's that number again. All of this makes sense in light of that. What I find ironic here, Matthew, is we were going to be talking about the other numbers, and we went here.
Well, Brian, you need to understand that, ladies and gentlemen, we have talked about it many times. It's just you probably weren't listening. Okay? Why did Gabriel say first 2,300 days, and the next thing out of his mouth was 1,290? You're supposed to know the difference between that is 2 years and a birth cycle. Okay? You should know this by now. Because, ladies and gentlemen, I learned this in Sunday school. I literally learned this in Sunday school. So you should know by now. You should know by now. You should also, now that I'm thinking about it, it's pretty important for you to know something else, as a matter of fact. This is your flight of fantasy verse that you use. And all of you is going to run around and say this. There it says harpage. It says harpage. Do you see the lie? Let me outline it for you. No, that's not what it says. Look and see. Switch over to the Bible source code. That's not what it says, ladies and gentlemen. Something is missing there, isn't it? Can you see it? Can you not see that they've been lying to you the whole time? Can you not see what it says? Because it's not saying what it is you want it to say. Ladies and gentlemen, look at it. That's what the Strong's is telling you. It's telling you that it's G726. Look at the Adito Regia. Look at it. Do you see that word there? Of course you don't. Because it's got a G. This is a lie. Here, I'm clicking on it. That's a lie. That is not. Do you see that letter there? Of course you don't, because that's not what it is. It's harpage. Look, it is harpage. It is not harpazo. I do not care. Not the least little bit what your preacher has taught you. He's lying. The Greek never said harpazo. It said harpage. I just showed it to you. I just showed you the Greek. Now, I understand that a lot of you don't know Greek, but I pointed out what the Strong said. Ladies and gentlemen, it has been deliberately miscoded. That's not G726. It's G724. I just showed it to you. Literally. I literally just showed it to you. It's not harpazo, it's harpage. I'm not lying to you. You're not worth going to hell over. I'm not going to lie to you and wind up in hell. Or even, don't you understand that? That the book of Revelation plainly says that no liar will enter the kingdom of heaven. No liar. So you're not worth it. I don't care who you are, how much money you make. You're not worth going to hell over. That's why I'm not going to steal from you. I'm not going to lie to you. I'm not going to kill you. You're not worth going to hell over. Because if I lie to you, I'm not a Christian. I'm a liar. If I kill you, I'm not a Christian. I'm a murderer. I'm a murderer, not a Christian. See, that's how it works. And I've probably went way too far, and I'm going to get way too much hate mail, but I already told you I'm going to control F it, just like the bride taught me, and I'm not going to read it if the word rapture is in that email. So just don't do it. Don't. Look, you've got siblings. Oh my goodness, bride. I mean, I get emails from Russia, from... Look, you got siblings out there across the planet that really need my help because they really don't have a shepherd. They don't. So please don't send me an email asking me about a rapture. And please don't send me a video explaining to me how Noah's flood is an example of the rapture. No, it's not. It's a perfect, detailed description of exactly what Brian read out of Revelation chapter 12. Ladies and gentlemen, Noah didn't go nowhere except for a swim. He was in the flood. Now, yes, he was in a place that had been prepared for him by God. I'm not lying to you. I swear I'm not lying to you. Noah and his family didn't go nowhere. All the righteous people were put inside a specifically designed. I mean, he gives you length and breadth and what he covered the boards with.
One has always been brought up, and I was just asked about this. When he opened the fifth seal, I saw under the altar the souls of them that were slain for the word of God and for the testimony which they held. Okay, it quite clearly tells you who these people are. So when this happens later on, he turns around and goes, well, who are these? Well, immediately you should know. You just saw them about 2 seconds back. These are the ones that were martyred. They were slain for the word of God and for the testimony which they held. So now that's all taken care of. Why is it that in all actuality, and as I said, I applaud the people that have been trying to understand the timeline, but the whole problematic factor in it is why they don't understand it, and I continue to see the repeated mistakes where they're taking numbers and adding them to each other and putting them in the wrong places is because they're trying to do but one thing. It's all about figuring out when the time of that event's going to be, that we don't like to use that word, even so much so that a guy here locally dropped the bomb and said it's going to happen in April. Well, guess what, buddy? It didn't happen. So therefore that makes you what? Okay, if you continue to use that, continue to try to slide it into your quote-unquote timelines, your timeline's never going to work. I don't care which way you construct and deconstruct and reconstruct and try to make things up to fill it in. There's only one thing that makes it fall apart. And you use it, and these people do it over and over again. They make a new date prediction. It doesn't come to pass. They turn around. They do it again. Look, you cannot understand it when you have an event that you've made up and interjected into the timeline and then can't figure out why you can't put the proper equation together. So as much as I can't stand talking about this topic, in order for us to explain the timeline to you, you have to remove the doctrine that causes division and strife. You're told to avoid those things. If something causes division and strife, guess what? You automatically need to have a check mark in your mind saying, if people are fighting over this, then something they are saying is not correct. Duh. And you're to avoid those things. This is why I avoid this topic like the plague, but unfortunately, in my personal life, I have to deal with it on a nonstop basis because I'm always asked about it. Well, when's it gonna be? And I don't mince words, I don't play. I sit there within about 15 minutes, I explain the entire course of events and watch people sit there dumbfounded and go, that makes perfect sense. Well, of course it does. That's what the Bible says. If they're not teaching you what the Bible is saying, if none of it's lining up with what the Bible is saying, I don't care if they're telling you to pick up your King James only version. Get a clue. Okay, we deal with the original languages. We're showing you what's there in the original language. If somebody in China is using a Bible that is written in Chinese, are they like terrible people because they're not using the King James? I mean, come on, folks, give me a break. So let's just drop that garbage while we're at it as well. So now that we can actually move forward with where this is supposed to go, and myself included, don't pull me into your groups and this, that, and the other thing in your little social gatherings so that I can be drilled about the timing of that event. I will leave. I will block you. My email is out there readily available. If you want to send the hate mail to me, I'll do the same thing. So now let's get down to the reality of the matter here. Now that all this is out of the way, we can actually look at the timeline itself. The 2300, the 1290, the 1010, the 280. Recall what I said previously about the 4 cycles of 7. In Daniel 9, it states 70, satiety or fullness, 70. Not 70 weeks, it says 70, satiety or fullness, 70. It turns around and repeats 70 and 70 2 more times in there. Already you have 280. You got a birth cycle being completely shown to you, but on top of it, what was being relayed to Daniel at that point in time? Okay, Daniel, I'm going to reveal to you everything right here because this is a cycle. It's a cycle of 70s, and the fullness of the 70s being shown that this is a long course of events of what's spoken thereof in Daniel 9. Why is that? Does everybody recall when I kept pointing out all the 70s and I didn't point out the last one? There's 6 of them there. Let me explain something to everybody. Within this cycle of 70s, we've went through 4 of those cycles. There's the 280. Now we've slipped into the next cycle. Once we slipped into that, you've got a half of those 70 left over at a 35 marker. Okay, so that goes into the 5th 70. When everything rolls itself all the way around in its fullness, in its completion, after the 1,000-year reign, after everything that has happened there, bam! New heaven, new earth. 70, fullness, 70. Now we can understand why it is that there's 6 of those 70s that are inside of the book of Judges right there in chapter 9. I kept pointing those out for a reason. Not even certain of... Just, Go through it here and look at the standard approach, because usually I see what people are doing here is they want to add the 1290s, they want to add the 1335 on top of it, they want to put the 1260 in one spot, then they get confused on where to put the 2300. You have a mechanic that's going on here where certain portions of this timeline are overlaid on top of the other, encompassing the 2300, just like Matthew pointed out. You have being amplified to you a birth cycle. Correct? The two, 1290 and 23, you get 1010. He also pointed out that you got the 40. Okay, you have multiple variables in this. But all of a sudden on top of it, you get that 1335. Well, what's the difference between that 1290 and 1335? That's the number we cannot know. That's when we're wobbling to and fro like a drunkard. That is its representation in that place. Then begins the next cycle of the count, where we talk about the 1260. I've gotten sent several of these videos over the last couple of weeks, and I see the same mistake over and over and over, trying to put the numbers together and make one long sequence of events. They're right in recognizing where we're at. They know that it's coming. What I guess is even more bothersome to me is they recognize the finality of 2021. But they can't understand it yet. They can't see it. Don't have these numbers set in their proper order. It's just going to do nothing but confuse you, making matters worse, even including the prophecy of Daniel's 70 weeks. Okay, I've struggled with this one for years. There's always been something there that's bothered me. And with what I did earlier in the week, the whole problem is when we've done the calculations, we didn't take the rest of the portions of the equation and enter them in as they were to be entered. Once you enter in what you're told in the book of Ezra, you get a specific set of counts. You get Cyrus, you get Darius, you get Artaxerxes. You're told, guess what? You got a threefold count here. Then all of a sudden, lo and behold, you find out there's a very specific count between all three of those. But that was supposed to encompass 7 weeks. Didn't put the other variables into the equation. The equation didn't make sense. That was the problem I had with the equation. We weren't accounting for the other variables in the rest of the Bible so that we could unlock and understand Daniel's 70 weeks, what was really being relayed to us. So Matthew, I'm hoping you can come in and start now explaining this timeline with these numbers to drill this home.
Oh, really? Wow, how many times have I done that? All right, ladies and gentlemen. You have to understand that this is a seesaw. The pivot point is the tribulation trigger, which cannot be counted. We cannot measure time there. It's a finite point in time and space. So the Bible calls it 45 days, he calls it 5 months, and he calls it 150 days. After that event is 1,260 days, which he also calls times, time and a half times, which he also calls 42 months. Before that pivot point, there is 2,300 days. The measure of time that is going to lead up to Matthew chapter 24 is 1,290 days. The 45 days that's been added to it, which you're given as 1335, though he doesn't say 45 days. That's why he doesn't say it. Is because they cannot be measured. Now, many people have run around trying to calculate the exact times for the tribulation. I'll tell you a great mystery. Before and after is equal to 3,560 days. Those are the only days that can be measured. The time in between, those 45 days, the 150 days, that 5 months, can't be measured because you've been kicked off your axis. You've gone back to the days of Noah. That process takes some time. God can't do it at the drop of a hat, or the earth will fly apart at the seams. That's exactly what the parallel apocalypse says. It says the earth will come apart at the seams. The seams being, of course, the fault lines. So you should already know this by now. Especially if you're, let's say, at the time that my son turned 15, you were 51 years old. You should have known that by now. That's what God says with his own mouth, at least out of one side. Not in Greek, but in Hebrew. When you tear apart that Hebrew word, it says, come apart at the seams. That's what it says. But anyway, that's beside the point. So you're supposed to know that there's going to be a span of time in honor of the slaughter of the innocents, a period of 1,010 days, which is just going to be a building. It's going to build up. It's going to build up. You should have been preparing. During that 1,010 days, you should have been getting the oil for your lamps when that time starts. Now, I hope that started whenever God isochronally fulfilled the Emmanuel prophecy from Isaiah chapter 7. Because between November the 29th, 1947, and of course, November the 29th, 2012, the first event, the UN divided Palestine. The second event, they declared Palestine to be an observing member state. That's 65 years, by the way. So it was during Hanukkah, of course, 10 days later, 10 days after November 29th, that I hope, I'm not saying it is, but I hope with all of my heart, that's when the 2,300 day count began. I hope, with all of my heart. Because not only do I not have a savings account, I don't have anything for retirement, I don't own anything, everything I have is really worthless. But even beside that, I wouldn't even want to retire even if I had $1 trillion. I want to see Jesus' face. That's what I want. So this is just what I'm hoping. Okay. That based on, of course, celestial semology. Okay, those two things combined, which is why I think this. So you need to write this chart down, of course. You need to know what 2 years and under is. 1 year's 365 days, plus 365 days is 730, plus one birthing cycle of 280s, that's 10. That's 1,010 days. This is why, of course, that alphanumeric integer there that Strong's lied to you, that's not what Revelation chapter 7 said. It said RMD. It didn't say what it wanted you to see. That's why that chapter is different from the Hebrew, because you're supposed to know what exactly the Psalms does. See, it takes the 10 verses from chapter 10 and moves it to the 9 months of chapter 9. So that's why after chapter 9, the Septuagint numbering for the chapters is different than the Hebrew. Because God talks out of two sides of his mouth. Because one language, even though both of them never had Arabic numerals. Never. Never. They never had Arabic numerals. 1, 2s, and 3s, they never existed in Hebrew or Greek. Not ever. So anyway, just so you know that. So you need to understand that's why God's doing that. You're supposed to know those 10 verses from chapter 10 weren't moved back, they were moved forward in time. But you can only perceive that if you have eyes that can see. But anyway, this is why I am hoping that even though I cannot see it publicly, just go to the NASA websites, look it up. They are searching for Planet X. They have been searching for Planet X since the 1800s. This is why, of course, Einstein came up with his theory of relativity to answer why Mercury was out of place, mathematically speaking. Okay? At any rate, just so you know, I'm hoping that the celestial scapegoat exited the Oort cloud on Hanukkah 2012. Even though I can't see it, of course, I've done a bunch of work over there on the prophetical about this very thing. I haven't released the second paper yet. It's not done. Of course, I've hurt my right hand. The next one concerning Planet X will be, of course, entitled The Celestial Scapegoat. This is going to set a series of events that NASA has already mathematically proved. It started with the Nice model that turned into Jupiter's Grand Tack model, which, of course, all these things they know can only work if there is a Planet X. The Nice model, the Grand Tack model, they both, NASA publicly proclaims that there must be a fifth gas giant. Of course, we, the children of God, should have already knew that. There's 4 cherubim, and of course, the one outside of Eden. So we already knew that, long before NASA ever figured it out. What I'm telling you is true. You need to find the verses in the Bible that in their totality equal 3,560. You need to know how many they are and what they say, because they describe the 3 folds of time I just told you about for at least the past hour. And you'll really appreciate the verse that describes when time's topsy-turvy, because it's exactly, of course, what Noah and his family was feeling on the ark. See, they'd never been on a boat before, and you only think you know what motion sickness is. When the tribulation trigger has been tripped, you're not only going to be sick due to motion sickness, you're going to be sick because of temporal sickness. Time itself is going to speed up and slow down. You're going to be very, very, very sick. That's what the verse used to describe time topsy-turvy. That equals 3,560 says. Comes right out and tells you. God don't have a problem telling you. And you shouldn't have a problem receiving it, because guess what? Gabriel really did go rattle Joseph's cage. rattle his cage. Get up right now, get your wife and child, and travel for 10 days to Egypt. Now, if God did that to his very own son, you should probably expect that that's probably going to happen to you too. Because, of course, we know that a baby that age would be very colicky. Oh, you didn't know that? You've never had children? Yeah. If you get a baby up in the middle of the night, throw them in the back of the car, go moving, guess what? You've got a serious problem on your hands. Because they have motion sickness. Because they've never had solid food before. You wouldn't know that unless you'd experienced it. When time goes topsy-turvy, you're going to feel just like Jesus felt on the back of a camel, having not been weaned yet. But you'll figure it out. Wait and see. Unless, of course, you get sealed, then you're in for things you don't want to go through. Although you will be put on a pedestal at the end. It's just going to cost you your head. Ripley's Believe It or Not. Brian, we've went far enough. I would say that emotionally, I've went too far. As a matter of fact, ladies and gentlemen, I had surgery on my right hand, awake, because Matthew don't do narcotics. So I'm in a whole lot of pain. Therefore, I haven't got very much sleep. Therefore, I have to apologize because probably throughout this program I acted in ways I shouldn't have. There's no excuse for that. But I do want to say this. If this video has edified you in any way, please like, share, and subscribe. And in doing so, I pray that the Lord, our God, bless you. Bless you personally. I'm sorry if I got a little emotional. I do believe, to the best of my ability, I actually showed you what you needed to see. And some of the things I intentionally did not show you. Brian himself has not had a chance to process some of the things that I showed him. And we're going to talk about it here in just a few minutes after we hang up. I love you with all my heart. And you know, I want you to have oil in your lamps. I really do. But there's swiftly coming a time that if you hadn't went and purchased your oil, it's going to be too late. You know, I'm literally pouring myself out to you right now. I'm doing this for absolutely free. We don't have our YouTube videos monetized. I mean, nobody sends us donations on a monthly basis. They do it when they feel like it. I mean, all this is, I mean, Brian, the bandsofTime.com, all that stuff. Nobody pays us on a monthly basis. Nobody. I mean, I've got some siblings that are kind of consistent, but I'm doing this for free. I'm literally dumping myself out. But I guess I should have known that. At any rate, Brian, I have said goodbye. I'll, of course, pass it over to Brian to terminate the episode, but he can add whatever he wants to as far as I'm concerned. I have said as I have said. I've done what I could. when I could to the best of my ability. Till next time, ladies and gentlemen, as always, God bless, Godspeed. Bri?
Got a lot of serious situations that have been taking place here with the situation with Nineveh, with the situation with Damascus. If you go back and you look at those prophecies concerning Damascus, look at the ones concerning Nineveh, folks, we have really gone into the mode of really dealing with a situation where it is repent, the kingdom of heaven is at hand. So some of our messages are going to be a little bit sharper due to the fact that we have got so much going on right now, and we can't even keep up with the tremendous amount of activities that we are missing on a continual basis. Let me go in here real fast and point this out. And this is, we talked about how the events of Ezekiel 38 and 39, they're in reverse. This is one of the key factors so that you can understand how it is that we know where the new North Pole is going to be. It's because of what it states right here in Ezekiel 38:12. To take the spoil and to take the prey, to turn thy hand against the waste places that are now inhabited, and against the people that are out of the nations that have gotten cattle and goods, and dwell in the middle of the earth. This word literally is going to be, it tells you the navel. That's why it is, that's how it is, that we know that our center point, that just as David Flynn had taught us, the temple at the center of time. Why is it that I've been doing all this work that has everything to do with the timeline? On top of it, has to do with getting the correct timing of when that temple was rebuilt the second time, when it was that they came back out of the land. That number is not in its proper place. It throws everything else out of sight. Why? It is the temple at the center of time. I want everybody to take note of a couple of factors here. Remember how I said that we've got 670s in there? That's telling you you've got a totality, a fullness of 420. You have to understand that when we see aspects, that we've got timers on top of timers on top of timers. Matthew and I spoke about the Mina scale. It had hit me that doing this up in a chart truthfully cannot represent what is really there. A three-dimensional construct is about the only way that you can understand and see all the countdowns that are happening. We had 1972. We had one of the first resolutions stating that the Temple Mount was, well, where the Temple Mount is, it's the building that stands there as we speak, had been made into one of the most places on the face of the earth that's about to become extinct. They put this into place in 1972 in November. 46 years to build this temple. That takes you to 2018. You add another 3 years onto it once again. It rolls you into 2021. You should see these things. You're going to start finding out that you're going to start seeing multiple variables of very important numbers that are going to be showing up everywhere. Matthew brought up December 2012 during Hanukkah. That countdown started. I looked at a different count that happened at the point in time when Jews worldwide cried out for Messiah back in September of 2012. At that point in time, I looked at that, realized that this ties into multiple prophecies concerning the Gentile coming in. Did the calculation, put it on paper, didn't even go and look at it until just a few weeks ago in 2016. And in there, I stated in March of 2016, around the 23rd of 2016. Well, everybody, at that point in time, we had already been in full swing with the entire Western world is basically moving towards the path of massive race wars. Okay, this discussion just came up in my house today because I walked out in the middle of it and I got heated. Because they were talking about some of the odds and ends that are going on, and I stopped and I said, look, I said it's a little bit more intense than that. People of every creed, of every color, are turning on one another. And this is happening all over the Western world. And I kind of pointed it out. I said, look, because they said, I can't stand this. I can't take what's happening. And I said, look, no one ever said this was going to be pretty, but this was foretold thousands of years ago that this very event was going to happen. Okay, so when you take 42 weeks from that point in time when Jews worldwide cried out for Messiah, and it comes plumb dab right in the middle of the entire Western world getting ready to erupt into civil war, it begins to be enough where you really have to stop and take a Selah moment. And I just wrote up a piece on what it says there in Psalms 83, because you're going to find out that the word woe is encoded into that as well. Folks, we are trying to prepare you. There's so many things happening here. There's so few that are pointing them out. At least there's a fair number that are recognizing them. I at least applaud that, and I'm thankful for the ones that are there that are doing it. There's some people out there that are putting together just some killer videos that's just nothing more than some news clips thrown in with a bit of music. That stuff, man, whoever you folks are, you're doing an excellent job, because you're pushing the point home to a degree even better than I could with those pieces. Folks, saw this stated by someone earlier this week. Someone wanted to do a teaching on Revelation, and they pointed out, well, we don't need to worry about that stuff. We're in this dispensation of grace. They've gotten into a mindset that they don't need to be watchful for any of these things, that everything can just kind of carry on as is. Buddy, you need to step back. You need to pick up your Bible. You need to study it. You need to know whatever language you speak, back and forth again. Then proceed to start looking at the original languages. Need to be, as Matthew always states, biblified. They're preparing you for what is and what is to come. With that, thank you everybody for joining us. Have a good night or day, and God bless.